I've got it.
Tom, sit down. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, kia ora whānau, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. Welcome to the PSA R&D first half day. Great to have you all here. For those that don't know me, I'm Dave Tanner. I'm the KVH chair. And apologies from Stu Hutchings, the CEO of KVH. We call him Hoppy Stu at the moment. He's on his way into hospital tomorrow to get a new hip. Welcome to the PSA coordinators, both online and in the room, and to all the growers, tech transfer providers, grower service reps, etc., etc. It's great to have such a wealth of knowledge in the room, wanting to pick up on the outputs of today. Very quickly, I'll give a few housekeeping rules. Toilets located back outside. There's some near suite next to this room. There are some back at the stairwells if you need those. Smoking, for those of you that are smokers, not sure that we even should talk about you, but you're supposed to disappear somewhere else miles away, okay? Please recognise in our COVID environment, that's why all the chairs are separated. But for those of you that are partners and live in a bubble, you are welcome to put your chairs closer together. Or in fact, if you have no desire to sit next to your partner, you can separate them further apart. It's entirely up to you. You can sit on each other's knees if you really want to, but you'll probably just make everyone else jealous. Evacuation, out the doors, down the stairs, and heading out into the car park. There's an assembly point out there. And health and safety, if you notice any near misses or you watch me walk through here and nearly trip over this cord, you can report me if you like. There is a defibrillator also located in reception should anyone need that. I'm hoping we don't need that today. Welcome to all of those joining us online, and we're really sorry that we couldn't accommodate you with the 100-person rule. We're going to have a 15-minute break at 2:45 for afternoon tea, where we'll all go and get a cup of tea. You will go and do whatever you wish to do at your house or a place of work. I hope you know where your toilets are and your emergency evacuation procedure. My next question for you all: who knows what happened on? No, who knows the date that PSA was found in the New Zealand kiwifruit industry? Close. Close. No, Barry, I thought you might have known that. That's it, no more from you. Dead right, Paul Jones, well done, chocolate fish to you. 4:45 p.m, it happened to be a Friday afternoon. Most of us were heading off into what we called the Koru Club at Zespri to have our first beverage for the evening, and it blew our world apart, to be fair. Less than 2 months to go until a 10-year anniversary. So have a think about it. It's been a long time, we've come a long way, and we're getting there as an industry. We can't knock ourselves too badly, but I think it's probably timely just to reflect a little bit on the tough nature of those, particularly the early years in that 10-year cycle. Today, 4 questions. If you need to ask questions in the room, we're going to get you to talk into a roving mic. So put your hand up, somebody will run around. We're trying to record the session, so we need to get your question that way. I'll possibly repeat the question if I'm quick enough to get to the microphone, if need be. For those of you online, you can type in your question. There's a Q&A button you'll find in the top right-hand side of your screen. You type your question, and then we'll have somebody monitoring that at this end, and we'll repeat your question out to the presenter, and everyone will hear it and get the answer. The purpose of today is to focus on raising awareness and push back against some of the apathy that might be creating or being created in the industry. It's also about transferring new knowledge and challenging those here and online to integrate that knowledge, implement it, and improve our outcomes because of this. Today we'll profile only a small snapshot of projects. We won't be able to go through everything that's in the PSA program. Today is about getting you thinking about how you are managing PSA and generate some discussion about what else we might need to know. Format is the short, sharp presentations with Q&A at the conclusion of each of the presentations. So without further ado, I'm going to ask, I think it's Sonia, you next up, to come and tell us a little bit about strategy for the program and program overview. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Tēnā koutou, ko Sonia Whiteman taku ingoa. Welcome whānau. It's great to have you here and see the interest in PSA. We were quite overwhelmed at the registrations for today's event, and it's a little bit disappointing not to be able to have you all in the room and really feel that energy and that interest in PSA that remains there today. So really appreciate your interest. My job today is to give you a little bit of context and overview to the session as we come into it in terms of laying out for you the strategy for the PSA portfolio, and then we will get into some detail later in the session about some of our key projects. So as the first slide mentioned, I'm the team leader for Protect Supply at Zespri, and that's one of our platforms and areas of activity. And what we're all about is ensuring the supply for our customers and providing good returns to both our growers and our shareholders. And our focus there is to do that in a really sustainable way, both in terms of that kind of quadruple bottom line reporting around how the impact that we have on the environment, the impact we have on our workers and our communities, and the impact that we deliver a positive economic outcome for our growers. PSA is our, without a doubt, most impactful disease that we have that we currently manage on orchard. And we, from a perspective of where we want to be with our sustainability objectives, it causes us the greatest headaches. So we're very focused on making sure we're managing this disease in a way that is good for our growers and good for our customers. What I'd like to share with you now is two slides that I regularly present to the group of the Zespri board that has oversight and governance of the innovation platform at Zespri. And we, on an annual basis, go back to the board and talk about what we've achieved and what we're planning to do for the coming year. And our business development officer that we have works with us to try and put some numbers around the investment that we've made in an area and the return that we've delivered either for the company or for our growers or for both parties. And what I've pulled out here is some key highlights from the previous year. And we talk about what we call supporting outcomes and key outcomes. And it was with a great deal of pride that I was able to go to the board this year and say that we've had 3 projects finish up, 2 of them with considerable supporting outcomes and 1 with key outcomes. Those supporting outcomes take the form of a new piece of knowledge that we will then probably eventually build on to deliver a key outcome. And really nice to see two supporting outcomes there and a key outcome in terms of the copper resistance program that we've previously reported to you on our improved understanding of what it takes to manage PSA with copper. I won't steal the thunder of a later presentation in terms of what we've been able to do with frost. But we've also had quite a significant program about researching the microbiome that exists on our kiwi fruit and understanding potential options for biological control around PSA. So it's been an exciting year. Let's move away from words and tables and numbers and talk about people and how we've connected in with the industry. And this is one of my favourite areas of my job. And so those of you that were here last year might remember the photo that's in the middle up the top there. That's Stu Hutchings speaking at this event last year. Down on your right-hand corner, you'll see a photo from one of the field days that we held in relation to a project that Phil will be talking about later in the session. And something that I really enjoy doing and sort of matches my passion for writing is that we regularly report on outcomes from these projects in the Kiwi Fruit Journal. So hopefully over the course of the last 12 months, you feel like you've had opportunities to keep connected in and understand what's happening in the portfolio. As always, wanting to run you a little bit through the current projects. The PSA strategy was last revisited in 2017, and there was a strong focus on having a PSA resilient industry. I spent quite a few sessions with the steering group late last year and early into this year, thinking about where are we now, nearly 10 years on, as Dave mentioned, from the initial incursion, and where should we be focusing our efforts. And what we've determined is that in 10 years, which in pathology times is actually a really short period of time, we've established a lot of base fundamental knowledge about PSA that has really helped us in our fight against the disease. And now where we want to focus our efforts on is turning that science information into a format that makes it readily accessible for our growers and our orchard managers to implement. So a real focus there on something that we call translation to support adoption. Of course, we can't forget the focus on the future, on today's events for those of you that are working against this disease every day. And there's a real strong focus there on both optimising our current control options. So we recognise a lot of the products you use have been evaluated and quantified as a single item. What we want to do is move to a program for you in terms of what products and what cultural control management techniques to use together to get the best outcome. And then we're also focused on the future in terms of bringing in some softer options. I mentioned at the start of my talk that PSA causes the greatest headache in terms of diseases in the orchard. That's not just from the impact of the production impact the growers feel, but also from a marketing perspective. We have products in our crop protection standard that don't fit well with where we'd like our brand to be. A number of you will have been at the Momentum conference and heard about our sustainability objectives. So we really want to get to a point where you've got more tools in the toolbox that have a very light environmental impact, both in terms of the people using them, on the environment and your kiwifruit orchards, and also in the final consumer of the product. And a couple of really exciting options in the pipeline that have shown some fantastic results, both in the laboratory and the glasshouse. And I hope this time next year we'll be in a position to maybe start talking more public about them. In terms of governance of the PSA portfolio, I would like to kind of call out and also at the same time thank the steering group members. We have a group that meets 3 to 4 times a year. They generally meet for a day. The packs are often 200 pages long. They also get constantly annoyed with email and phone calls from me, and they do that on your behalf. They do that on industry's behalf to make sure that we're investing the research money we have available for PSA in areas that will make a real difference. And so I do want to acknowledge the PSA steering group members, and a number of them are in the room, and I'm going to upset them even more by asking them to stand up so you can put some faces to the name as I call them out. Not surprisingly, there are a lot of staff from the KVH and Zespri team in there. Our chair is Stu Hutchings, who's unable to be here today. Julia Ansell, who is my direct manager. Dave Tanner, I've made Dave stand up once, so I won't do that to him again. Linda Peacock, who I'm sure you all know. Beth Kidd, I suspect Beth's online at the moment. Glenn Bradbury, who's an apology today. Mel Walker, who I know is here in the coral shirt up the front. And I want to make special mention, those are our internal steering group members who I do really appreciate and value. But I suppose a little bit, I feel like that's kind of part of their job description. I want to make a special kind of thank you to our external steering group members, because I feel like most of them are absolutely doing this job on top of full-time jobs. And I'm very lucky to be supported by 2 science experts in the field of pathology, both Lindsay Bullman and Rob Beresford. But I feel like I have saved the best for last when I acknowledge our grower members. McGill Peterley, who's up the front here. I think Dylan Wadsworth's in the crowd. I saw him registered, he might be online. And Megan Fox, who I also know is online. And we have an observer in there, and Mark Bullions, who is our plant and food research business manager. So really quite critical role in terms of aligning and working with me to make sure the projects that are contracted through PFR, which is where most of our PSA work is done, are run effectively. So I guess probably if what you hear today makes you happy and you feel like a good job is being done for you, you've got a couple of faces that you can go up and shake some hands off in a COVID compliant way. But if you feel like we're missing some things or there's some areas that you'd like to see being more attention, I really invite you to raise those ideas with the people that I've just introduced because they are open and willing to and want to hear feedback on what we're doing and how we're doing it. So with that, I'm going to pause briefly for questions and feedback. Perfect. Well, that's the objective of that talk, is to give you a little bit of an insight to the overall kind of objective and strategy for the PSA portfolio. And now we're going to get into some exciting stuff and actually start talking about some projects. So with that, I'll invite Kabir to come up and give the first presentation of the day.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, in this term, I will be talking about when PSA is infecting Hayward birds. Last year, I have presented 1 year results, and this year I will be presenting 2 years data. First of all, a little bit background about this budrot. This budrot can be a serious problem in Hayward, and it is associated with PSA. And the symptom is looking like a distinct sepal browning, which you can see in here. And due to this infection, flower growth totally stops. Sometimes if the infection is not that great, then it can partially open. And in severe case, you can see the flower bud has dropped from the pedicel, which is in the red circle. You can see the flower bud is missing. What we know so far about this budrot, in our life cycle study, we learned that PSA infects the external part of the flower bud first, then it moves inside the flower bud, and this is completely dependent upon the inoculum pressure of the orchard. But still we don't know which growth stage it is actually affecting the flower buds. If I cite an example in here, which is the recent COVID-19 infection, the age group 70 to 90 was very vulnerable to this disease. But in terms of the flower bud, we still don't know which flower bud is associated, mostly associated with the budrot infection. So our aim is to know the developmental phase of the bud, which is mostly associated with the budrot infection. So the aim of achieving aim for this project to target the PSA management at appropriate time. So what we did in 2018 and 2019 is springtime. We have created 4 windows based on the flower bud growth. This is the window 1. Let me say about the window. Window is the exposing of the flower bud to allow a rainfall droplet to infect the flower bud. So what happened? We covered the canopy at the time of almost like dormant stage, and then opened the canopy for 1 week. The first window was opened, which is just after approximately 2 weeks after the bud burst, when the leaf buds were closed and was on the exile. Then that window was closed, and the second window, which is window 2, was opened 1 week later when the flower bud growth stages was like this. it was in developmental stage. And similar way, we have opened the window in mid-developmental stage and also in the full developmental stage, and to see which flower bud is mostly associated with the bud rot infection. In addition to these 4 windows, we had 3 controls. One was completely covered. We didn't open the cover for the whole experiment time. And the no cover control, that is the treatment which didn't receive any industry practice. And the growers control, which was completely not covered but received the industry practice. Now I'll be presenting my results. First of all is the bud rot infection, bud rot incidence. So we have assessed the bud rot infection in 2 ways. First of all, considering any type of infection, it grows from very minor infection, which is sepal browning only, sepal browning 1. That means 1 or less than 1 sepal is brown, and the severe one is the whole sepal browning. Considering any types, all types of bud browning, what we have seen when we open the window, at early bud stage, the window 1 showed significantly high infection compared to window 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, as well as the completely covered one. And the similar results we have found in 2019. The window 1 showed high infection, significantly high infection in this year too. So the conclusion from these results is the early flower buds need to be protected from PSA infection. We have also assessed the flower buds based on the severe bud rot infection, which is only 4 plus sepal browning like this. And we have also found that window 1 had the significant high infection in both years. Still, we need to do an investigation that the severity, bud browning severity, how it is affecting the fruit set, which is not included in this study. Now, let us see about the bud rot symptom progression in each window. This is the bud rot infection in window 1. So this is the bud rot infection over the assessment time in here. And this is the window opening time, which is from 10th of October to 17th of October. The right y-axis is the rainfall scale, and the left one is the bud rot infection. In both, in 2018, we have seen that after opening the window 1 in 10th of October, within 14 days, we got high, significant bud rot infection in here, and that went up to about 50% at the end. And similar thing we found in window in 2019 as well. So significantly high infection we found within 14 days, and then it went up. And in both years, we found significant rainfall, which is green bar, which made us a good conclusion that the window 1 is very associated with the flower bud infection. And this is due to favorable condition, which is rainfall and inoculum. As infection is happening within 14 days in here, so the suggestion is, it is suggesting that protectant, PSA protectant need to be applied before weather event and before the infection takes place. In window 2, we have seen in 2019 there was a rainfall and significant infection increased after 1 week of opening the window. And this is showing that window 2 is also, may also be associated with budrot infection. We didn't make a good conclusion out of it because we didn't have that much rainfall in 2018. So that need to be further investigated. What happened in window 3? Window 3, we had a significant rainfall in 2018, but the budrot didn't go that up. So that is suggesting that this developmental phase, when we open the window, may not be that much associated with the flower bud infection. But we didn't have any rainfall again in 2019 one, so we didn't make a good conclusion about this growth stage, which need to be further investigated. What happened in window 4? Window 4, we actually didn't have that much rainfall either in 2018 and 2019. And also the infection didn't go up. And with the higher level of rainfall and lower level of budrot incidence will help us to make a conclusion from window 4, which still need to be investigated. And in completely covered one, which where we didn't open the window at all, cover at all, there was a low level of budrot infection in both ears, which is suggesting that the PSA is mainly external. This is the grower practice. Grower, these are the positive controls, where one is the grower control and another one is no cover control. The grower control, which is the yellow line, it is showing that it has increased significantly around 24th of October, and grower has applied pre-flower girdling and ActiGuard after that, which is actually not targeting the PSA management program. This is the result of 2018. And 2019, that protectant application forwarded a little bit early, but still it is not targeting the PSA management. So that is something probably need to be done in here based on our research findings. We have also assessed leaf infection qualitatively, and what we have found in 2018, there was a significant rainfall in window 1 and window 3, and these two window had no significant difference among them. But this leaf infection is significantly higher compared to window 2, 4, and completely cover 1. That means when we have a significant rainfall, the leaf infection is very high. Similar findings we have found in 2019. In this year, the high rainfall happened in window 1 and window 2, and the leaf infection was very high in here. So these results are suggesting that leaf protection is very essential to reduce PSA inoculum. Now is the summary. When PSA is affecting the flower buds, as I have described earlier, that the window 1, which had like 47 to 79% infection in 2018 and 19, when the window was opened, similar growth stage like that, and that stage is highly susceptible to budrot infection. And window 2, we have found 1 year with the 37% infection, but still we need to verify that one with a significant rainfall. These window 2, these bud stages might also be susceptible for PSA infection. In window 3, we had a good significant rainfall, substantial rainfall, but didn't increase the budrot. That means this window 3 growth stage might not be that much associated with flower budrot. And window 4, we actually didn't see any rainfall in here, so we can't conclude anything from this window 4. And from the completely covered control, As we didn't see that much infection, that is suggesting that the PSA is mainly external. And the grower control, what we have seen, that is somehow is not targeting the flower bud. And the infection, it takes actually 2 weeks to show the visible symptom on the flower buds. And protectant application before symptom appearance is good thing to practice. And in our future research, as I have mentioned that we didn't have significant rainfall in all window. So we are trying to set another experiment having some artificial droplet of water, which will give us a good indication that which stage is very associated with the flower budrot. And we assess the flower budrot just after window 1 is over. That means we don't know what is happening before window 1. That means the flower bud appearance time. So this year we'll be looking for some source of inoculum in that time period. And as I have showed you that different types of budrot infection we have included for our budrot incidence, but we haven't tried that what level of infection caused the yield loss. So that is another thing to try. And the management practice, as we have seen that window 1 is mostly associated for budrot infection, and also maybe the window 2 is also associated. So that means some spray program need to be tested around window 1 and window 2 time. I acknowledge growers and EHC Orchard Service for allowing us to conduct this experiment. And I acknowledge my PFR colleague from FRN and EDM team. And finally, acknowledging Zespri and KVH for funding this research. Thank you very much.
Any questions in the room, Barry?
Just pull it out.
Yeah, just a moment. We've got a mic coming. Here it is.
Thank you, Kabir. You mentioned that the grower control program wasn't effective in stopping the bud rot. Can you just explain what the grower was doing? What treatments did the grower use to try and manage PSA during that period?
Is it only the experimental period, or you are talking about before the experimental time?
Just before and during.
Okay. So what I have showed you over there, that is the management during the infection, during the experimental period. And before that, I have seen what I can recall from their spray management program, that they have applied protectant at around July. And after that, I haven't seen any spray program happened in that orchard based on the spray diary I got.
Just to follow up on that question, in regards to the, you commented that the sprays that the grower put on weren't targeted at PSA. It looked like there was one spray there that was fairly close to your infection period, I thought.
This one?
This one, or there was one previous? Yeah, what about, see that Actigard there, you said that was, oh, that's because it was after flowering, is that right?
Yes, yes. No, that is before flowering, but the infection started. We assessed our first assessment on 17th of October. Already there was some infection happened by that time, and the grower's application happened far later than that.
Yes, but it does look like from your results that it is actually influencing the bud rot. Is that what I'm seeing there?
Actually, that is not targeting appropriate time for management. That was my comment.
But it's still giving you some effect.
Yes, based on the no cover control, when there were no protectant application, which is this one, is still giving high infection compared to the grower control, which is the yellow line. But still, that infection can be reduced if the management happen before this time.
Just a moment, Linda. Coming to you.
I think I remember from Joel Van Est's work quite some time ago that PSA bud rot can be in the flower without, or in the flower bud without having any external symptoms on the flower bud. So I'm really keen to see the follow through on the work that you will do on your scale for assessing flower bud rot based on what it looks like on the outside and what the consequences of those various levels of appearance of sepal browning relate to in terms of fruit set, because what's really important for growers is not how much flower has bud rot, but whether that turns into economic loss or not.
Yes, I agree with you. Infection, one sepal browning or two sepal browning might not create any problem, but definitely when all sepals are brown, that means 5 sepal browning or 4 sepal browning might cause damage and affect the yield. I agree with you.
You've identified that risk period being the first window, the early period, and then you've looked at the rainfall, and I guess the other, I wasn't clear in my own mind if the risk was the rainfall, or a rainfall event created that risk, or if it was just a young bud and it was like a developmental stage thing of the bud that it was more susceptible at that time. You talked about maybe next year when you're carrying this on that you're going to turn on the irrigation and have artificial rain or something. So is there some way you can kind of tease out what the underlying cause is? Is it the developmental stage of the bud? Is it the rainfall event that creates the risk, or is it the combination of the two?
Okay, yeah, definitely. When we will apply artificial droplet of water at different window opening time, that will, I think, will come out from there, because we'll be applying a water droplet at every growth stage which we have already identified. And yes, by using that one, definitely it will come out.
Miguel, last question. Can we have the up here? Miguel, can you put your hand up so that Victoria can see it? Right here. Thanks.
The level of bud rot seems quite high. Would you be able to, can you describe the site or the environmental conditions around this orchard? In terms of, is it an orchard that typically suffers with PSA infection? And the other question is, can you comment around the pre-flower girdle? Should we be looking on doing earlier as recommended, like around 30 days before flowering? So the site first.
Yeah, the site is, we were working over there for last 4 years. Yes, that is very highly susceptible, highly pressurized orchard. We have seen.
Sorry, where is it located?
That is in Paingarwa area. And Rob Beresford is looking different weather condition. He's also he also set one weather station in there, and he is looking the bud rot infection and weather. So hopefully something will come out from that weather risk of bud rot project. And the pre-flower girdling, that was, yes, just like 30 days before flowering time. that actually need to be tested, especially on the high PSA pressurized orchard. Without doing this thing, probably without testing, I can't actually comment on it.
Thank you, Kabir. That's the end of your first presentation. We'll just have a round of applause for Kabir. I'm going to get Kabir back up in a minute because he's doing the second presentation as well. But for those of you that are online, some of you may be struggling to use the chat function. If you are, you can bombard Sonia Whiteman's phone with your questions if you wish. Her number is, and here we go, get ready with your pen and paper. If you want to bombard or anybody else in the room, do so as well. 027 534 3974, or her email address, sonia.whiteman, and that's Sonia with an I, not a Y, at zespri.com. Kabir, you're back in the gun, back on the stage with your presentation. Is Gold 3 bud rot a thing? Is that right? Did I get that one right? Good. Excellent.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to my second presentation. This is on Gold 3. The bud rot on Gold 3, is it a thing? So the little bit background of the Gold 3 bud rot infection. Growers are started to see the bud rot problem in Gold 3 since 2016, and these symptoms is associated with PSA, but the symptom is different from the Hayward bud rot infection, which I have showed you in my last presentation. In here, the bud and the flower stalk show the necrosis symptom either in the flower bud end or in the scar where the lateral buds are attached to the pedicel and the stalk. Can also be on the stem end, the necrosis. And the flower bud look like orange color in the orchard. And last 2 years we have seen that one. It is happening in at the around of end of October. And in one event we have seen that 29% incidence flower loss happened in one orchard, which gave like 13,000 trays per hectare. The extent of this problem and epidemiology has not been studied, and I will be presenting 1 year progress report of a 2 years project. So the aim was to know at which developmental stage this PSA is getting detected on PSA flower bud, and how this flower bud is moving into the, how PSA is moving into the flower buds. And also we want to assess the incidence and progression of these symptoms throughout the symptom development period, throughout the season, and also wanted to see whether there is any effect of flower thinning to reduce the flower bud rot, because last time when we have seen the flower bud rot infection, we saw the pedicel, the lateral bud scar was somehow got infection, and that could be a point of infection. That's why we try to see whether the timing of flower thinning can reduce the flower bud rot on Gold 3. We did this experiment into two sites where actually 3 sites. One is in our research site and another 2 was in commercial site in Bay of Plenty, where we had the history of budrot incidents. And we have monitored 15 vines and for the budrot infection. And we collected the birds and sterilized those birds and did the DNA extraction and detection to detect PSA. So the first of all, PSA detection and symptom development. We have collected flower buds at a different developmental phase. These are the phase which is scientifically denoted, but focus on these stages would be good. So these are the early buds where the buds are still closed, and this is the developing buds, and this is the bud where the sepal is getting separated, and this is the developed buds. What we have found in last year, in both sides, when buds are in late developing stage, they showed the detection of PSA. So that means something protector need to be applied prior to this flower bud stage to minimize this budrot. We have also tried to see the movement of flower PSA throughout the flower tissue. What we did for this experiment, we have separated flower into stalk, sepal, petals, anthers, and ovary. And we started with the non-symptomatic flower bud. Although there are some flower tissue showed some infection, detection of PSA in here, but the level of infection was very low. But the developing symptomatic buds, we have seen most of the flower buds showed higher detection of PSA, and the advanced stage symptomatic buds showed the detection of PSA from all flower tissue. So that means the PSA is going from outside to inside, and the similar results we have found in another site, and this result is consistent with another study which we did previously with the green cultivar Hayward. These are the non-symptomatic bud where there are no symptoms on the sepal and pedicel. And these are the symptomatic developing buds where sepal is slightly brownish. That means infection is starting to happen in here. And these are the advanced symptom where the flower become completely orange and the pedicel is completely destroyed or about to show the infection. And these are the some images in the field what we have found in there. The yellow arrow is showing very happy buds which are not infected, and the white arrow is showing the buds which are symptoms about to appear, and the red one which are the symptomatic bud completely damaged by PSA. We tried to assess the budrot incidence and symptom progression in 3 sites. In 3 sites, we have seen that the progression started from the week of beginning at 21st of October, and all the sites has shown the infection on 28th of October. And we have checked the rainfall event in those 3 sites, and we have seen that rainfall happened 1 week prior to that infection increase. And that rainfall and inoculum might be the cause of this increase of the budrot infection. And the final bud rot incidence we have found 8 to 35%, which varies location to location. This progression also happened even after flowering. What you can see in here, this is the bud fruitlet stage, and still there are some necrosis on the pedicel. If it happens like that, the fruitlet will not form into fruit, which is also cause significant damage and also cause yield loss. We have tried the thinning, flower thinning in our research site, and this is the orchard practice, which is orchard thinning has happened on 26th of October, but in our late thinning program we did that one around first week of November, and that reduced the bud rot by 6%, but that is not significantly different from the normal orchard practice. Although it is not significantly different, but still the bud thinning scar can be a point of flower bud infection. And also in this season, the thinning has happened in dry condition. So we can't really, probably didn't see that much difference in here. And there could be some small increment of this bud thinning timing, which can contribute to reduce the bud rot infection. So the summary is PSA is detected at the time when the sepal is about to separate onto the flower bud, and PSA moves from external tissue to the internal tissues of the flower bud, and the bud rot incidence varies from site to site, which we found 8% in one side to 35%, and inoculum load and the rainfall might be causing this variation. And late thinning reduced the flower bud in our experiment. And I acknowledge growers and our orchard site staff for doing this experiment, and EHC Orchard Management Service to allow us to do this experiment in their site, and our colleague in PFR, and finally I acknowledge Zespri and KVH for funding this research. Thank you very much.
So those of you that are online, get your messages or your questions through. Is there any questions from those in the room, please? Hugh, just a moment. Comes the microphone for you.
In that presentation, you weren't really showing us where bud break was in relationship to your graphs. Is it very similar to the Hayward? In other words, the time from physically the first stage of bud break to the growth of the flower itself. So we're talking about which time we need to put protection on.
Okay.
I mean, in the green, in the first series, we saw quite specific where the point of bud break was to the timing after. But this presentation didn't really show it, or I didn't pick it up.
Actually, I have mentioned some bud burst timing around here for different site. Are you referring to this question?
So you're talking 10 to 11 days.
This happened at different time at different site.
Okay.
And the infection happened around this week. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Victoria. Oh, sorry, Barry. Okay.
Thanks, Kabir, again. The late flower thinning, any likelihood that the flower thinners took off your infected buds or they dropped off in the process? So your 6% difference was really as a result of the late thinning?
You mean whether the infected bud has been taken off at the time of thinning? No, it was thinned. Only the way it was thin is taking the lateral buds off. And every time we have assessed the king flower bud for the bud rot infection. So we haven't removed any king flower, whether it is, yeah.
Was there any correlation with the rainfall and or the temperature with the bud rot? Taking into account the temperature, was there any correlation with the temperature in regards to the bud rot?
Actually,
with the rainfall?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the temperature, but we can look that one later on.
Did you say it was just gold on Bounty rootstock that you had a look at?
Yes, these results are mainly from Bounty, not Bruno rootstock.
Previously, I've been told like the incidence of bud rot was greater on Bounty as opposed to Bruno. Have you seen that in other stuff?
We have another presentation, I think, that's going to cover that, eh, Kabir? So, yeah.
Oops.
No drama. We'll come back and answer that one soon. Oop, there's a bottle of wine for me. Who's that? It's not me, I hope. Was that you ringing?
No.
No, okay. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, we're going to carry on. We're running a couple of minutes behind time, so we'll carry on. I'd remind people online, please fire those questions through via Sonia's text message service. She will be sure to respond to you. Rob Beresford was going to be up next, but unfortunately Rob is not here. He's an Aucklander and he decided that he wasn't going to come and share any issues he may have had in Auckland with us. And we've struggled, I think, to get him online. So in his place, Sonia is going to present his talk. Thanks, Sonia.
I think I've been going to events like this for about 25 years, and there's always that moment in the program when some numpty has to stand up and say, so-and-so was supposed to be here today, but instead you've got me, and now I finally find myself in that situation, and it's strangely exhilarating, so let's have a little bit of fun.
You just called me a numpty. I'm out of here.
Some numpty stands up and says they have to give someone else's talk. So as you've seen in the program, this is a presentation around PSA and frost, and is it a risk factor or not? I'd like to acknowledge the plant and food research team that sits behind this. Obviously, Rob was the senior author, but it's a collection of a team within the PFR group, and they're listed there on the bottom of the slide. And this project was funded through the PSA portfolio by KVH and Zespri. First thing I don't like is a pears and slide. So I think we're all aware that orchard frosts can have significant damages on our crop. You know, between 0 and minus 0.5 in both spring and in autumn in autumn you'll see it drop your leaves, and then about this time of the year, and I know from when I let the dogs out at night and probably a few dark circles under eyes at the moment, you'll all busy be frost protecting at the moment. And so frost protection is a major concern for us if we've got fruit on the vines or if we're in that tender spring growth period. Ground frosts occur more often than air frosts, as you'd expect, but it's the air frosts that we're of concern in our orchards because that's where our productive zone is. And there's been anecdotal information in industry that perhaps frost injury, so those ice crystals form in tissue and it breaks things open, causes a potential point of entry for PSA. And there's also research that supports this. So what we wanted to do was have a look at the point at which that happened and whether we needed to be doing anything about it. So we know that when we're frost protecting, it's all about protecting those shoots both from the damaging effect of the frost and also that wound creation and the point for PSA to come in. And that's why we tend to advocate after a spring frost event, that you get out there and put some copper on to protect from PSA infection. And you're also looking at starting up that program for the year in terms of preventing bud rot and leaf spotting and later on cane infection. So absolutely, when it comes to spring events, you should be frost protecting both for protecting your green material that you're going to grow your crop on and also to prevent PSA infection. Let's turn our focus to autumn. So provided that you've picked your crop, a good autumn frost is really helpful in terms of dropping those leaves and getting in there and being able to prune. But again, we recommend that when that leaf drop starts occurring, you're opening up a potential point of entry for PSA. So getting in there and protecting with a copper. So absolutely, frost events in autumn can be a risk for PSA. However, in winter, once you've hopefully finished pruning and you're looking to settle down and have a little bit of a break before the hydrogen cyanamide season starts, or you have to move into spring protection for frost, can you take a break? Or do you need to be concerned about the potential for a winter frost to cause that damage and allow PSA to infect? We know from our colleagues in Italy and our growers in Italy that particularly during the early 2010, when we were just learning to come to grips with PSA, after a severe winter frost event, they would report quite high levels of PSA symptoms in their orchards. But it's important to remember that they were looking at frost more like at minus 11 degrees. And researchers over there simulated this in artificial cane inoculation in the lab. So we wanted to understand what the situation was here in New Zealand in terms of the potential for those winter frosts to create damage that PSA could infect through, and did we as growers and orchard managers need to take any actions to protect ourselves from that? So we did two things. First of all, we looked at the frequency and the severity of frosts in the different kiwi fruit growing regions. Up on screen is some historical data from 3 of our key regions that looks to contextualise our frost events versus the Italian frost events. Linda, keep nodding at me, it's really making me feel good. So up on your top left-hand corner, you've got the data for Kirikiri. We go to the right through to Te Puke and down the bottom, Motueka. The solid black line is running through at 0 degrees. And also 0 days per month. Your blue line there is showing the coldest air frost temperature, and then the red line showing the number of days that a frost event occurred. And I suppose the thing to draw your attention to is that the amount of time that blue line is spending down in those negatives in those different regions. Hardly at all at Kirikiri, and that's why our growers up there struggle a little with winter chill. A little bit in Te Puke, and having just returned from Nelson, I can affirm that they do get those sort of cold temperatures down there in winter. And what's really interesting is if we compare it to the Italian situation where they're talking minus 11, and here in New Zealand, our most severe events in Motueka are down around the minus 5. So we then wanted to take that into that's historical data from a range of weather stations. We wanted to take this into some individual kiwi fruit orchards, install our probes up in the canopy and get a feel for what was happening there, which the team did over 3 years at both Makatu and Waihi, and in each of a Hayward and a Gold 3 site. And the data from that piece of work is showing up on the screen for now. And you're seeing the gold 3 is shown in the darker of the grey bars, the Hayward in the lighter of the grey bars, and showing the lowest temperature in each month. And it supports the data that we had for the regional Te Puke data, where very few of those frost events are getting anywhere past -4, -4.5 degrees. So again, demonstrating that the frost events we're experiencing are not as severe in Italy. And the team went out and backed those observations up with what they were seeing in terms of symptoms out in the field, and they saw no frost damage on those dormant canes. So basically the frost events weren't severe enough to see damage to dormant canes. And there were PSA cankers, but they couldn't be linked to those frost events. So we wanted to try and get on top of what that kind of critical level of frost event was for causing a PSA, causing damage in those dormant canes that a PSA infection could then take advantage of. And we did these detached cane studies in the laboratory to do that, and showing up as on screen are little short pieces of dormant cane that were put in the fridge, or and some stage the freezer as well. This was accompanied by our usual sort of multifactorial design, where there was wounding and no wounding, and inoculation and no inoculation at a range of different temperatures. And then they measured the growth of any cankers over a 3-week period. Moving on to the data. So the temperatures that we used ranged from -6 through to +20 degrees C, and you've got the pink bars there showing the length of the canker in pink, and then the water only control in green. And what you see is that there is a group that the length of canker is not significantly different, with the -2, 2 and 20 degrees. But when we get down to -6 degrees, you see a significantly longer lesion length when there's PSA inoculated, and a very low length of canker with the water only control, but this is probably due to that natural kind of wounding event as opposed to a true infection. Rob made the note that where there was no frost injury, there was a tendency for canker to increase with temperature. While this may seem slightly counterintuitive, it's probably because at those higher temperatures, PSA is multiplying faster and causing a greater canker length. This work was quite nice. I always enjoy it when we have a bit of data to back up some of our anecdotal information. We know that Gold 3 has more severe canker symptoms than Hayward does, and the team presented this piece of data that supported that as well. So where there was no frost injury, Gold 3 showed greater canker length than Hayward. But what is interesting is that once you got to a point of the -6 degrees, the difference between Gold 3 and Hayward was removed, such that the frost became a more impactful factor in the risk of PSA infection than the cultivar did itself. So that's a nice piece of data to have as well. And really highlighting there, we're sort of starting to feel that -6 for the 4 hours that this was run becomes that critical point where frost is having enough impact that we do see increased PSA infection. So a little bit of commentary in there around winter frosts and the conclusion from this piece of work. So we know from our orcharding experience that kiwifruit canes can be killed at air temperatures below 10 degrees and injured at temperatures below -6. However, the good news is these kind of conditions, particularly in the North Island, are very rare, and as you'll be aware, we currently do not have PSA in our southern growing regions where we'd expect that frost could become an exacerbating factor for PSA infection in winter. A nice piece of data to support what we already know, that Gold 3 is more susceptible to PSA than Hayward, and that, as I mentioned, at -6 degrees for 4 hours, that cultivar susceptibility difference is overridden by the impact of frost. I suppose one of the potential silver linings of climate change and a trend towards global warming is that frost and an association with PSA infection could become less of an issue. However, it's important to remember that during those periods of active growth when that tissue is getting damaged, that we do go out there and provide copper protectants to prevent PSA infection. Thank you, and invite questions. I think the slides even matched a little bit what I said, eh, Monty? Do you reckon? Yeah, cool. Questions?
Just a comment, really, Sonia. Thank you. It just reinforces the importance of doing everything we can to keep PSA out of the South Island, because those growers are going to be hit much harder than us in the North Island if PSA arrives, if I understand the study correctly.
Absolutely, and that's a really good take-home message. Thank you, Barry. I did. Nothing on there?
Because there's a question on there, but it's not for you.
Could we go back to a question for Kabir?
So we do have a question for Kabir that's come through on the Sonia Whiteman text messaging. Yeah, I don't have eyesight problems. But do you need me to blow it up so you can read it? I see. Kabir, question for you. Have you measured sugar and starch during stages of flower bud development? What's happening with PSA infection could be because of natural physiology. I expect sugars may likely increase during sepal development towards pollination, which may increase PSA. Just a hypothesis. This is from Jenny Aitken from the Tree Lab.
Actually, we didn't do any physiological assessment during the budrot infection. Yes, that can be something we can focus on later on.
Thank you, Kabir. Good man. Oops. Just stay, because you're next up again. Jenny says thank you very much. She's got to go offline now, but she thinks it's been a great talk so far. Our next speaker is Kabir, and he is going to tell us about Bruno versus Bounty and what is my risk. So Kabir, where you go.
This is my last talk. Yeah. So Bruno versus Bounty, what is my risk? A little bit background of this talk. As I have mentioned that Gold 3 growers are experiencing budrot incidents since 2016. And we found 29% flower loss in one orchard. And we have noted that orchard was, Gold 3 was grafted on Bounty rootstock. Then we know that the Bounty rootstock has some advantages over Bruno, which are in terms of increased bud break, increased flowering, advanced maturity, and higher productivity. And also Bounty rootstock perform better, especially in the heavy soil, which has a water logging problem. But is this budrot a risk in Bounty rootstock? This problem has not been studied previously, so we tried to understand that problem, the incidence in both rootstock. So our aim is to survey Gold 3, both on Bounty and Bruno rootstock, based on the budrot incidence, to understand that whether this is a significant problem or not, and what is the potential risk. So we conducted this experiment in two sites. One is in our plant and food research site, and another one is in commercial site in Bay of Plenty, where we had some budrot incidents previously. We monitored 15 vines from each grafted vine, and we monitored 100 buds from each vine to monitor this problem. So when we assessed the budrot infection in gold 3 grafted on Bounty and Bruno rootstock. The Bounty is the blue color and Bruno is the yellow color. And the letters in each assessment date is, if it is different, then that is significantly different. What we have found in site 1, which is a commercial site, that Bounty rootstock grafted G3 showing significantly high infection of budrot compared to Bruno. And similar findings we found from a research site, which is PSA challenged, that the significant infection budrot incidence happened more on Bounty grafted G3. So these results are suggesting that growers need to pay more attention to the PSA management when gold 3 is grafted on Bruno rootstock, Bounty rootstock. So these are some images. This is one site where this is Bruno grafted gold 3, which is little bit later compared to the Bounty one. And this is these two vine are located in one bay in our PFR site, where you can see the Bruno gold 3 is not showing any budrot symptom in here, but the Bounty rootstock grafted one is showing orange color flower budrot. These are some close view which you can see in the Bounty rootstock grafted G3, and the flower turned into brown, most of the flowers in here, but the Bruno grafted gold 3 is not showing any symptom. So in one site in 2008, what could be the risk factor for this gold 3 then? It could be weather event, or it could be the orchard management practice. We tried to collect some information from a site where in 2018 there was about 30% flower budrot compared to 2019, where we had 10% flower budrot. We have seen that in 2018, they have paid, in 2019, they have paid more attention, grower has paid more attention onto the September application, and the thinning, bud thinning happened in dry spell weather. So the thing I have mentioned, that what could be the risk factor? It could be the orchard management. That means the suggestion is to lower the inoculum, especially in September time, and thinning at dry time would be another practice. But these are information from 2 years, and we are still following up that orchard, that how it is going in next this season. So the summary is the gold 3 grafted on Bounty rootstock is showing more budrot incidence, and grower need to pay more attention if their gold 3 is grafted on Bounty rootstock. I acknowledge growers and orchard management service for conducting this experiment, and also acknowledging Zespri and KVH for funding this research. Thank you very much. I can go now.
Well done, marathon effort. You can't quite go yet because we'll give everyone a chance to ask you questions on Bounty versus Bruno. Put your hand in the air. We'll come around with, okay, down here. Victoria, you're right there. Yep.
Hi. we have also, on the same site, we have Bounty and Bruno blocks. Our one Bruno block is in the middle of both Bounty blocks, but we had a big amount of damage, budrots and also leaf spots and on our Bounties, but our Bruno was very good. We also use all same spray programs and also do our thinning on good dry days. And last year was not much rainy during the spring season. So I think only wind was the major effect for PSA spread in those blocks. And it was also very patchy in our Bounty blocks. And a couple of rows was nice and consistent crop. And in a couple of rows, we lost more than 50% buds. So what could we do this year? Any change in spray program, or we should bring those same sprays a little bit earlier?
Awesome question. I'm glad you've got it, Chief.
Actually, we don't have any experiment based on the spray program, but yes, it is very patchy. It is very patchy, and definitely inoculum has a major impact on this disease. And this inoculum distribution is very variable around the orchard. So definitely, as per this spray program showing that September time, actually it is very difficult to say whether it is the September application or the thinning at dry spell of time is giving this less number of budrot. So still we didn't do any experiment on this, but these are some indication that based on these things probably we can go ahead to get a finding from here.
Bobby, I think you might have answered some of your own question though. One possibility is bring a spray program forward a little bit. I think that would be, and if I put it around the room, those of you on Bounty may consider that you need to be a bit earlier than focusing on the Bruno timing. Yep. Barry.
Kabir, thank you again. Normally, I would expect Bounty to be planted in wetter, lower lying areas of the orchard or bay. I know in your photo you showed two plants side by side, but I assume that's not normal. So of your comparisons in this experiment, was the Bounty vines normally planted in wetter or colder areas, more stressful maybe for the vine or not?
Actually, these are done not in a wet soil or heavy soil. This is one experiment we did in one block, that is some rows are grafted on Bounty rootstock, another one was Bruno, but in the same block, another one was in the same bay. So it was not compared the way you have mentioned.
It's definitely become a little bit of a change in practice. Early on, Bounty was for stressed areas. I think there are growers out there now taking advantage of Bounty's earliness and utilising that even in good soil. So, yeah. Tim.
Were there pack out differences in yield between the Bounty and the Bruno? Like, does Bounty have a lot more flower, but then it loses it or loses that surplus flower with bud drop? Like, was there a difference at pack out?
Sorry, say again.
So Bounty's got more flowers than Bruno, but it's also more susceptible to bud drop. So if Bounty's got more flowers, do you just end up losing a bunch of those flowers at with bud drop, and then at pack out, the fruit numbers are about the same?
Fruit number, that is actually depend upon how much infection you have. And yes, if flower bud rot in such a condition that most of the flower has gone due to bud rot. We have seen, but this is not quantified. Yes, the fruit size and the number of the fruit size become very big, and in the yield perspective, I can't actually say because we didn't do any yield measurement on this experiment.
Just on that, Tim, Sonia's yelling at me from across the room saying that Zespri are looking to do some modelling on some of that. So you're sort of talking about, have you got a bit of a positive sacrificial thinning going on, and does that end up with still a positive outcome? Zespri are going to look into a bit more of that.
I was just comment about, I think what he was trying to say is PSA a cheap way of bud thinning the bounty. Not proven yet, I suppose.
Not proven.
Can I just add to help you, Kabir, with that a little bit, and also to thank Bobby for his comments earlier. The particular orchard Bobby was talking about earlier, KVH did visit because we were almost starting to think from the level of problems we were seeing, did we actually have another PSA on our hands? So we took samples to be sure that it wasn't a resistant strain. So that will give you a feel for what it actually looked like for Bobby. And I just checked in with him earlier, and I hope he doesn't mind if I let you know that there was a material difference in the cropping from that block to the tune of something like 6,000 less trays per hectare from that block. So indiscriminate thinning by bud rot is not the way to go. And I would also echo what Dave suggested, that I think that if you mark your sprays to your earliest breaking bud variety on your orchard, you're probably going to be sitting in a better place.
Good job. Now, did we have some questions over this way? Some. Some. It's coming, mate. Just a second.
Is it still to me?
Yeah, I think so, Chief. I think it's still to you.
So a week ago, we had a welcome to RED meeting in this room. Some RED is on my mind. It's a great meeting, by the way. Have you done any or planning to do any research on RED on Bounty and the effects of PSA, or have you heard anything about that? Any plans for that?
Yeah, Sonia's going to answer that one. She's we're going to have an internal Zespri conversation about Red 19 and PSA. There you go.
So thank you for the question, Osamu. In terms of from an innovation perspective, with Red 19 now being commercialised, it falls into the part of the business that is the innovation team that the PSA portfolio sits under. We are gearing up and thinking about our priorities in terms of how we respond to needs on Red 19. Our information from the trialists to date is that they are running the standard Zespri crop protection standard with Red 19 across the pests and diseases and feeling like they're getting good control. And so until we kind of hear any other major issues otherwise or new issues rise up, that will be our trigger to respond. The other slight kind of inhibition we have around Red 19 susceptibility is, in doing work on Red 19, is the available blocks to do work on is quite limited. And I'd have to ask the GLMs, and some of you might know yourself, I'm not sure if there is Red 19 on Bounty. There's down in Gisborne, yeah. So at this stage, that's how we're playing things. From within the NVIG, you sort of see that information there in terms of where Red 19 sits in its susceptibility. But as we stand today, we don't see any reason to treat it differently than we do with our current commercialised varieties.
Don't go too far, we'll get you to do that other question. We're going to wrap up for a cup of tea shortly. Have we got a burning question out there for Kabir before I let him sit down? There has been another one come through on the text service, but it was for Sonia. I hope you've vetted it before you answer it. It might have been a proposition, you never know. I did suggest that people might do that. Kabir, you can sit down. Well done, thank you.
I'm not even sure how to respond to that. So I actually wanted to share it. Thank you to Leighton Oates for reaching out. Had kind of a a bit of a different observation, and I think those different views are where the richness comes. So he shared that his contact with his Italian colleagues is that they start to feel the pain of frost more around that -3 degree level. So I've shared that back through to Rob. He also posed me the question of, is it possible that younger Gold 3 orchards kind of feel the pain sooner than more mature orchards? I hope I've interpreted his questions correctly. It's a good point, Leighton. We didn't actually investigate age vine in that piece of work, but I suppose if you just then switch to your kind of gut knowledge, if you like, and if we think about younger vines, they have less suberization and lignification, so less kind of layers of protection than older vines. So it is possible that they are more susceptible, younger vines, than older vines. And I think we even see that with our development orchards during the growing season. So would I recommend that you go to the stage of frost protecting with a young Gold 3 orchard? I'm not sure that we have enough evidence to kind of support that action, but absolutely keep an eye on your young vines.
Okay, you can all go and have a cup of coffee or tea. Those of you sitting at home, you can drink whatever you like. Don't drink too much of it. We do want you back at 3:05, so the feed will continue. We'll get the speakers going again at 3:05. Thank you. You all hope those of you online are still hanging in there. Remember your questions through either via the chat function on the Microsoft Teams or to Sonia's mobile phone. Our next speaker is going to tell us a little bit, we're going to reflect a little bit on the GoldFutures program. It's been a 4-year journey. It's the title of his talk. Phil Elmer, you have 20 minutes. I only tell you that because last time I heard you speak, you might have carried on for a bit, but it was fair enough. I think you were entitled to. Come on up, mate.
Thanks, David. That's lovely. What David didn't say is I probably had 20 minutes. What David probably meant to say was I had 20 minutes and I probably talked for 60, so I do apologise. Before I start, huge shout out for Kabir for giving 3 talks. I've only got 1 talk to do today, so let's get straight into it. So the GoldFutures journey, and what a journey it's really been. So we kicked the project off in 2016. We're now finishing the project up. And when you've got to do a project like this, which has got a lot of moving parts, we've got a lot of people that all have really significant responsibilities. And we've called this a band of brothers and sisters. So particularly, I won't be able to go through every single and thank every single person there. I would particularly like to thank Greg Clark for kicking the project off, and also to particularly to Sonia, who did a fantastic job with our project management. And of course, you know, we wouldn't have really been able to kick the project off at all in the early days if it hadn't been for Linda Peacock, and she helped us find the blocks that we stuck with for the 4 years. Of course, without our grower participants, we wouldn't have a project at all, and their cooperation and enthusiasm. Especially also would like to thank our subcontractors, Linda Hawes and Fruition. They did an awesome job working with us. And of course, you know, we're very fortunate to have some highly skilled people in the plant and food team. Right, so this was the goal that Greg wrote for us at the beginning of the project. Identify and report back to the kiwi fruit industry the best practice combinations of Gold 3 management PSA practices that reduce on-orchard PSA related risks to ensure the sustainable, profitable production of Gold 3 for the foreseeable future. So let's just start by going back in time to where we started. So we did estimates of what the PSA was costing some of our orchards. So when 10 PSA managed blocks, the OGR was estimated to be about 114,000, whereas in 10 PSA challenge blocks, it was just the 84,000. I apologise, it's been chopped off with the formatting. And of course, the opportunity cost there was around about $30,000. So the task was, you saw the long goal, here's the short one. It was quite simple. Get the PSA down on those challenge blocks and get the OGR back up. So in the first year of the project, as I said to you before, Linda Peacock was very instrumental in finding our blocks for us. We had to race around and find the appropriate pairs. So what we're doing is we're pairing a PSA well-managed block with a PSA challenge block. So we need to do that to overcome factors such as climate and soil type. So we found our 3 pairs in Edgecombe Whakatane, 3 pairs in Tauranga Paengaroa, and 4 pairs in the South Auckland and Waikato sub-region. Within each of those blocks, we established 10 monitor plots, and each of those plots, consisted of 2 bays. We did a lot of measurements. I won't go through every single one of those. Suffice to say there were a range of canopy variables right the way down through to the individual orchard gate returns. So let's look at how things looked when we did the percentage canopy fill, and then you can see that along the y-axis there and against the individual block codes along the bottom axis. So this is what it was. It was essentially grim. So within our the green bars are the PSA managed blocks, and the dotted line you can see across there is the average value. And so it was about 81%. Whereas in the challenge blocks, we've got a canopy fill, which is around about 64%. And you can see there's quite a wide gap between those two orchard types. By year 4, this is where we've actually brought the project to. The canopy fill, even in the managed sites, has increased to 92%, but there the average canopy fill now in the PSA challenge sites has increased from that 64 to 88%. And there's still the odd orchard, which is still in that recovery mode. That's an extremely good outcome. As we know, canopy fill basically drives everything, but what it did demonstrate that recovery was actually possible with the GoldFutures approach. What about the PSA symptoms? So in the first year of the project, along the y-axis along here, we've got the total number of PSA symptoms that we were measuring. So we were looking at leaf infections, shoot infections, canes, leaders, trunks. What's quite interesting was a predominance of those cane and shoot cankers in those early days in some of those orchards. And some of those PSA symptoms were getting up quite high in the year 1 of the project. So if we fast forward to year 4, you can start to see the first thing that strikes you, of course, is the number of symptoms. So we've used the same axis on the Y here. The number of symptoms that we've actually got now is much, much less. And also the type of symptom has actually changed. We're just picking up a little bit more leaf spotting, but much, much less of those shoot, cane and leader infections. And the margin between the managed and the challenge sites has now narrowed down as well. Trap plants. Trap plants were a cornerstone for this project. What do we mean by trap plants? We take potted Hayward plants. These are tissue cultures that we grow up in the lab and then under the greenhouse. We suspend those under the leaders for at least 10 days. What we're trying to do is put them out at a time when we know we're going to get at least one severe infection period. We then bring those back into a specifically constructed shade house, and we grow those plants on out of the rain for 3 weeks, and that allows that leaf spotting to develop. And then we score the incidence of PSA on the leaves and the severity on those leaves as well. So let's go right back to October 2016 when we first started it. The first thing that you'll see, so again, our green bars are the managed, our blue bars are in the challenge sites. The 3 red stars, that's a highly significant, statistically significant difference. At each interval, at each batch that we put out into the field at those specific times, the differences between the challenge and the managed sites was very highly significant. We move along into the season, even in the May in 2018, still very, very significant. Moving along the chart into 2018, low to start with, but then bounce back again. And then what was quite interesting in that particular year, particularly for the midwinter samples, we were picking up very, very high populations of PSA in the air. As we move into the 2019-2020, we can start to see for the first time that actually we're not getting statistical differences between the managed and the challenge blocks. So the big take-home message for a slide with a lot of data on it is that PSA inoculum can be present in blocks throughout the whole year. So what about the block microclimate? So in year 1 of the project, was it the cold, wet, windy blocks that were really the problem? So our job was to determine if the block microclimate was a factor in determining PSA risk. So we installed met stations in each one of those 20 blocks with the aim of measuring their microclimate, but also of allowing us to calculate the PSA risk infection events. So let's take a very, very high level view to start with. This is one of Linda's favourite slides. The different colours are shown up on the top there, the green for the Waikato, the blue for the Te Puke Tauranga, and of course the red for the Edgecombe Whakatane. Starting right back in September 2016-17. What you will notice, of course, is there seems to be a very similar reoccurring pattern over that period of time. Yes, there are some differences between some of those regions. So in the Edgecombe Whakatane, it's generally lower, whereas the Waikato South Auckland is basically generally higher. Let's just drill down a little bit more into some of that data. So these are the PSA risk infection events and the patterns across the seasons. So what we see, if I can summarise that very, very quickly, is that the 2016 and 2017 seasons represented very, very high risk in terms of the number of PSA infection events. I think we've been quite fortunate because the 2018 and 2019 seasons have actually been lower risk. Let's drill down even more. So I've taken this particular example here. The block codes, the individual block codes are on the bottom here. This is the Tauranga, Te Puke, Edgecombe sites. Each of them is labelled along the bottom here, whether it's PSA managed or challenged. And of course on the y-axis, the PSA infection risks in days. So as an overall summary, the first thing you'll note is that it looks like the number of PSA risk events in the pairs is actually quite similar. Of course, there's always an exception to that rule. And so in block S and T, in that particular challenge block, there were quite a few more PSA risk infection events in that particular pair. So block Orchard T certainly has got more of a struggle. Let's have a look at the spray diary analysis. This was another cornerstone for the GoldFutures project. So to try and summarise a whole chapter on spray diary analysis, we've used what is almost akin to like a heat map. Along the top of the tables there, we've got the month, and down the vertical here, we've got the green representing the PSA managed. And in the bottom table here, in the blue, we've got the PSA challenged. So to summarise all that information, there were 104 sprays going on in the PSA managed compared to the 91 total number of sprays in the PSA challenged. What was particularly interesting for us, not so much the number, but it was actually the timing of those sprays. So in that June-July period, there was quite a bit of a difference sort of going on. So we've highlighted just a couple there. So in those managed blocks, there were 27 winter coppers going on, whereas in the PSA challenge block, there were 16 winter coppers going on. So there was immediately an indication of a difference between those blocks. That was in year one. So we'll fast forward to year 4. We've done the same thing again. The first thing you might see is that essentially they look similar. The number of sprays being applied is also almost the same. We're still finding, however, some differences, which is quite interesting to us. So in the managed blocks in that April and May period, there was a sum of 23 sprays that were going on. Whereas in the PSA challenge blocks in that same period, there were just 13. But if you move over into that long, skinny red block, it actually looks like the challenge blocks were actually going harder in the spring. That's a good thing. So we still, despite the analysis, we still find gaps in some of our challenge blocks. They may have been responding to lower risk in the last 2 seasons. We do wonder if that's a risky thing to do. You recall earlier we talked about the cost of PSA. So let's revisit that for a moment. Here is an overall summary of what's in terms of the OGR and the comparisons that we've made. We've basically done the year 1 and the year 4 jump. So as you can see on there, the green bar is the managed blocks. The dotted lines are effectively the maximum and the minimum from those 10 orchards. The blue, of course, is the challenged, and the yellow bar there represents the difference between the average. So in that year, in that first year of the project, that difference was just over $30,000. Fast forward to year 4, the first thing you'll see, of course, is that the OGRs are jumping in both the challenged and the managed sites. The difference has now narrowed to just $6,500. Here's one of the best outcomes. I really couldn't finish today without showing you this one because we're all extremely proud of this block. This is located in the South Auckland, and it's a very, very challenging site. Your first thing you'll see, of course, is the dashed line around the bars for this last season. COVID-19 did severely restrict what we could actually do. We managed to get to some of our blocks, but we couldn't get to all of them. So we didn't always have the fresh weight and the dry matter samples. So our OGR values for the last year of the projects had to be calculated differently. So they were estimates only. The take-home message was a little bit of a pinch of salt with that. What you'll see, of course, in this particular block, its well-managed pair was the blue bar here, which was G. And this particular block started off, as you can see, in 2016, very, very low, struggling compared to its well-managed comparison. But look at the steady increase in the OGR in that block over time. 16 minutes. Another way you can look at the data is do a little bit of what we call cluster analysis. So of course we've picked on the best 2. Mean canopy fill along the bottom, OGR on the vertical axis. This is all sites now in the blue, and you can see we've got a wide spread of that data, and the red triangle there is basically the average. So in the 4 years of the project, we've taken it from that blue, widely dispersed cluster to this much more narrow cluster with an appropriate increase in the average. You would have heard me mentioned about the GoldFutures approach. So we often get asked the question, what is the GoldFutures approach? Young plantings, aggressive PSA, good management practice from the onset. Why? Because when we analysed the grower questionnaires, we found there was a significant effect of block history. Now that's a fancy way of saying that if a block's got hit with the PSA in that 2012, 2013, it tended to carry through the project. So young plantings must be kept clean from the beginning. Tool hygiene was something that was really interesting. We had twice the number of tool hygiene practices in the well-managed blocks compared to the challenge blocks. Therefore, tool hygiene was critically important to reduce the spread of PSA. It's simple, it's easy, and it's effective. Adopt the cut it out program as much as you can, of course, and protect those wound sites with an appropriate protectant. So remove those PSA infections regularly. This is now done as a matter of course in a lot of blocks, and do it throughout the season to get the level of inoculum in the blocks down, because it actually works. We also recommend stringing the canopies to get as much replacement cane as you can. We do have blocks that don't like to do that. So what we've adopted is the strategic stringing, which is where the PSA is a problem and you need more replacement cane, perhaps just string those particular areas of the orchard. Obviously avoid any gaps in PSA spray programs, because we are still picking up gaps in programs, and try to minimize that number of missed infection periods, particularly between bud break and flowering. You would have seen in one of the analysis of the spray program the importance of those protectants, particularly in winter, because there's just as much inoculum around as there can be in spring. So we advocate strongly the spraying before and after winter pruning. Learn to use the KVH Psa Risk Model, because it'll help with the timing of sprays. Get your own sprayer. Seems like a particularly obvious thing to say. And also for some blocks that have got sprayers, even one more makes a big difference. Having your own sprayer actually means that you can respond to risk and not dependent upon the timetable of the contractor. And finally, of course, make some changes to the site. It's all about reducing vine stress, increase the amount of light, reduce the wind damage, improve soil drainage and root health. And I would like to draw attention to some of the courage that it takes to make some major changes to a site. And this is in our and in one of our Waikato blocks. We had this huge old cryptomeria shelter belt, and she basically made the investment and completely changed the environment in that block. I'm looking at the time now, so I'm on the 20-minute mark. And we're on the home straight. Just 2 more slides. I'd like to put out a huge thank you to all those participants that took part in our project. They've been absolutely fantastic. We've also been very fortunate with our contractors and our team. And I'd like to acknowledge all the help that everyone has given us. Finally, of course, we wouldn't actually have a project if it wasn't for the funding from Zespri and KVH. Thank you.
Questions out there? Surely there's 1 or 2. Tim.
You had a graph there that was looking over the last 4 years, and you had basically, if I understood it right, the PSA risk coming down. My question is, over the last couple, is that because the weather's been more favourable, or is it that the background PSA pressure's less? Because, yeah, that graph.
Sorry, it was at the next one? Forward. Yeah. That one? That one? Cool. Yeah, sorry, the question was?
So the last couple of years,
yeah,
the PSA risk is less, or has been less.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts? Is that the weather's been kind, or is that more people are, PSA protection programs are becoming more standard, and the background disease pressure is less as a result of that?
I mean, there's no doubt that the PSA is linked to the the season and the number of PSA infection periods we get. So yes, the last 2 seasons have been quite kind. We have tracked those PSA symptoms that we get over time. What we'd probably need, and everyone's going to hate me for saying this, we kind of need a really risky spring to actually test. And I can see people nodding their heads. I can see Barry and Linda and Miguel going. So that to me would be the ultimate test for these blocks, would be to actually get them safely through another one of these sort of like 16 or 17 seasons. Yeah.
I guess just to show that presentation is
just a minute, buddy. We're going to throw that microphone up here, because otherwise they can't hear you.
I hear.
Yeah, I know, but
I know.
Now he was talking about that is completely in relation to the risk model event from KVH. So it's only weather events.
Yeah, that's right.
And that shows
2
bad seasons and 2 better seasons.
And two more favourable seasons. Yeah.
I had a question, but I forgot.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
Now he's got the mic. Now he's got, no, you're all right.
Well, it was more of a comment,
Okay, yeah.
Phil. On you mentioned this number of sprays on PSA managed and PSA challenged sites. Possibly that could be related to the managed sites were harvested earlier and who would have a copper and ActiGuard sprays would increase that number.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. So that was a comment.
A comment, not a question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Great program and presentation. 2 questions. In this chart, the spray programs, did those challenge blocks use more bactericides than the unchallenged blocks? I know that subject's coming up later today, so I thought this would be a good time to ask that question. Secondly, we've come to the end of year 4.
Yes.
It seems useful to continue in some way. Is there any thoughts about life after the GoldFutures 4-year program or not?
Okay, so two great questions. Good one. Okay, first question was related to the bactericides. Of course, we did track the number of bactericides that were being applied from the beginning of the project, year 2, year 3, year 4. When you actually go back and review it, the number of bactericides that are being applied is actually very similar. What's actually changed is the type of bactericides that people are using. So there's been quite a big swing away from the key streptomycin for obvious reasons, and a lot greater use of curcumin. So in terms of are the challenge ones using more bactericides, the answer is probably not at this stage yet. Second question, life after GoldFutures. We have wanted to explore perhaps a scaled down version, but really, in order for us to be able to do that, we need to get another year of funding, and there are other priorities, So having said that, and to be fair, there's quite a bit of interest in a sort of a GoldFutures sort of spin out project, which is to look at spray programs specifically that are reducing the bactericides and perhaps even reducing the amount of copper, and can it actually be done? So yeah, there is a spin out, at least one spin out project coming. Yeah, thanks Barry. Yeah.
Just down here first, and then back to Linda, and then we're going to have to wrap this up.
Hi Phil. A great example of a very successful multi-year study, so congrats for that. I'm just wondering what the main drivers were in the orchard gate return increase. You've mentioned dry matter, you mentioned yield. I mean, what did you delineate those individual drivers, and which were the big ones?
Yeah, we did. So each year we needed to, well, it was an hour and a half presentation to the growers basically, and we actually drilled down to fruit number per metre squared. But the driver again, I'd have to say was, the canopy's everything. So bigger canopy, more flowers, more fruit. That's where the drivers were coming from. Yeah.
Don't even muddle us up. Just trying to amplify our memories, Phil, in relation to Barry's question about bactericides. I think I recall that one of the recommendations we had for the challenged blocks typically was to encourage the growers to try and time the use of a bactericide in their spring program when they had an infection risk period, a severe period coming up, whereas many of the managed blocks were already doing that.
That's absolutely right. They were already doing that.
So
yes,
that there wasn't, towards the end of the project, a great difference between the two types in the number of, or the use of bactericides, because that was an improved practice for the challenged blocks.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Yeah, thanks, Linda. Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. Well
Cheers,
done.
mate.
Good on you. Round of applause for Phil.
Sorry, Miguel, we have to carry on. I'm going to ask the stand-in for Rob Beresford to come up again, and Sonia's going to give us a talk on what's new and old with the PSA risk model. I might just need to get you through.
Do you want to stay here and go?
No, I'll leave it to you.
So I mentioned numpties earlier. I'm having a blinding flashback to a really good idea I had when we were getting the agenda together for this event. And one of the things that was profiled quite prolifically in the GoldFutures project was growers' reluctance to use the KVH risk model, and the fact that we felt it was a really good tool to inform when that spray timing should occur. And when we look at extension, we know the best way to get the message across is to keep saying the same thing, but find a slightly different way to say it so that you finally get your message there. So I said to Rob, why don't you do a presentation about the history of the model and the improvements that we've recently made? And here I find myself doing it for him. So I will keep my good ideas to myself in the future, because at least on the last project, I was the innovation leader and had read the report. But I guess probably it is, I'm hoping that you all know what the KVH risk model is, and we do want to take this opportunity, because we do get asked questions about it, to put some of them to bed or just remind you what the answers are. And we have made some changes lately, and I do really want to encourage those of you that perhaps haven't used it before to go onto the KVH website. You will need to obtain a login, but hopefully you have that already, and at least have a look at a weather station near you and get a feel for the data that is there. And at the very least, if you don't leave this meeting maybe perhaps being prepared to use the KVH risk model, you'll be leaving with a very clear directive around why it's important to be considering the weather in your region and making a risk-based decision on when to spray. So what is the PSA risk model, the KVH risk model? It's a computer-based model available on the KVH website. It's actually provided through the Hawk Plus platform, so we partnered with Hawk Plus to develop this, and it was commissioned by KVH and Zespri back in 2011, because we recognised very early on that we needed to give growers some decision support making tools about when to spray. And it was developed in partnership with Plant and Food Research. So what do you use the KVH risk model for? Well, the foundation of any integrated disease management program is not calendar spraying, but making a decision to spray based on risk. And that goes to the heart of our sustainability objective as it pertains to plant protection, because with any resource you use, there's some sort of a cost. You'll all be aware of the cost of getting the sprayer in and the product that goes in the tank, and but there's also costs in terms of the water that's being used, the compaction of your soils, and it's a small amount, but we only make changes through making those small changes. The carbon that's emitted from the tractor as it drives round, or the sprayer unit as it drives round. So every input has a cost. We need to be sure that we're getting enough benefit to justify that cost. And the risk model helps you identify those periods that you're at risk of a PSA infection and putting on protectants at that time. So it's very much associated with weather. Had a little conversation before, and Phil put up the risk period, so he's done half the job for me. But it is very much based on, at this stage, weather only. We'd like to have an inoculum component to it. At the moment we don't, because bacteria is something that's really hard to measure, but that's something that we continue to talk about. So what it does is it takes weather from a locally based weather station, and those of you that don't have a weather station, if you've got a larger orchard, I'd actively encourage you to get one. Weather information is so important to our orchards for so many reasons. And what it does is it compares the current season with known parameters that will result in a PSA infection. So I've a little bit of information there from Rob, which I think I've already kind of covered off. It gives you, it profiles those times at which there's a high risk of infection. But the other thing that he has flagged here, which I haven't already, is it's also very useful in determining when you should or shouldn't be doing those high risk activities such as girdling or pruning. that could result, that creates that entry point for PSA. So you want to make sure that you're not out there, if you can, and gosh, this winter's been hard, I know, not doing those moon making events when you're in a high risk period. So a little bit of a snapshot there from Rob, just highlighting the fact that this weather's coming from weather stations, and there's quite a density of stations throughout all our key growing areas. The South Island's not on this map, but I have confirmed with Rob that there is an extensive network because of the apple industry available down in the Motueka Nelson area. And what that, so the model pulls from those weather stations, both historical data from over the previous months or years to inform the risk of the current period that you're in. Where does that weather data come from? Well, it's sourced from the New Zealand Met Service, and we actually are very lucky in New Zealand to have internationally one of the best sources of Met data in the world. And the forecast identifies an infection risk from approaching weather systems up to 10 days ahead. Of course, we need to know what are those conditions that causes PSA to infect, and this is where the research rubber has really hit the road. PSA, as you probably hopefully know, requires wet, humid conditions, and that gets the process of multiplication going. We actually require active rainfall to spread the PSA around, so there's a trigger there in relation to rainfall, and that risk alert is triggered as soon as we get at least 1 mil or more of rainfall in any day. So that's the triggering event. The size of that risk is determined by the temperature and humidity in the preceding 3 days. So you've got the trigger of the 1 mil of rain on the day in combination with the temperature and humidity from the 3 days prior. And the way that the scientists determined what these thresholds for infection to occur is through those trap plants and work in the laboratory and the glasshouses, similar lines to what Phil was talking about that we've utilised in GoldFutures. It's a case of taking those trap plants and hanging them in buckets out in orchards, measuring the weather conditions around that period, assessing the disease, and then effectively running correlations between the points at which you see the disease develop. And you see a picture, a close-up there of one such plant out in the field. So if we actually graph what that relation looks like, as with most biology, we see a real strong bell-shaped curve there that allows us to hone down to those exact requirements of combination of the temperature and the resulting relative risk. And this is described as the bacterial multiplication index, such that for every hour above 80% humidity, a risk value is calculated according to temperature. And not surprisingly, at there's kind of critical points in that bell-shaped curve where you get too cold and then you get too hot, that the risk goes down. So that gives you those outer ranges of that bell shape. And then you've got the optimum points at the middle. And Rob's highlighted there that at 6 degrees, your risk value is 0.9 out of a possible 1, and at 18.6, it's 0.41. And that reflects the fact that PSA tends towards cooler temperatures as a bacterial disease for infection. And the risk values are summed for all the high humidity hours. As I mentioned before, the trigger to actually have infection occur is that rainfall event. And so that kind of calculation of that combination of temperature and humidity needs to be flicked on by that rainfall event. And the output, if you've been in and seen the KVH risk model, is this kind of a graph. And it's a bit of a traffic-like system where you get a no bar if there's no risk, blue for light risk, moderate risk is yellow, and then a high severe risk is red. And the sort of hashing that you see, where there's no hashing, that's like you're looking out your window and you'll have seen it's rain. And then the hashed area goes into where the model has been able to use forecasted weather events to then forecast what your risk is like. So in this situation, you're sort of sitting there on the 11th of August, forecasting a severe event around the 22nd of August. So you'll be wanting to think about, particularly if you've got, if you're sort of starting to get towards bud burst. Linda and I were having a conversation in the tea break, whether you should be going out there and getting something on to protect what's coming through. And there's some instructions in the KVH risk model on how to use it. One thing we've talked about is that there tends to be a lot of risk events forecasted by the model. So we've worked recently to give some direction to growers and orchard managers about how to interpret that. And Rob shared on screen a table that helps you kind of decide what you might do there. Not surprisingly, no risk, no action required. You start to get into light in your problem areas, you might see an infection event. Moderate, you're going to most likely see it through all your orchard, and then in severe, you're looking at quite a across the board impactful infection event. As is the case with the disease triangle, it's important to remember that there are lots of other factors that relate to whether or not a PSA infection event. And again, Phil started to talk about that in terms of Tim's question in relation to the GoldFutures. You can have ideal weather events, but if there's no inoculum present, nothing's going to happen. You know, and the sources of that inoculum can be your unmanaged males. This is why we talk about, as pathologists, cutting out that source of inoculum with cankers. And also, as we saw out of Rob's earlier frost presentation, cultivar susceptibility and age of cultivar can have a large part to play with that. And we've touched on this already through the course of the day. It's nice when you get to this stage and the messages start to repeat and come together, that young tender shoots are going to be very susceptible to PSA infection. And of course, if you don't have any protection on, you're really increasing your risk. So in terms of that kind of categorisation of the risk that you're facing and what you might need to do, given your particular circumstances, and this is really nice because we're starting to have a conversation about your individual risk on your orchard and what you know about it. Rob's provided some guidance there about what you might do. So, and brought in this additional matrix of, well, what is the KVH risk model telling us in terms of risk down that left-hand column, and then on those on columns 2 and 3, are you a low risk situation or high risk situation? So in those low risk orchards, and you've got a more resistant cultivar and you've had a history of lower PSA, so maybe think our managed orchards that we have in GoldFutures. He's suggesting applying copper, and only when you're going to get a severe rain event, but being more proactive if you're in a high risk situation. And you're moderate, definitely get in there in both cases. And then if you're getting into a severe event, that's when we bring in our bigger tools in terms of our plant elicitors and our bactericides. So it's about choosing a tool that's related to the risk that your orchard situation presents. So Rob's got some tips and tricks in there about using the PSA model in orchard management. So it provides you the overall kind of risk in terms of the weather, but you need to be thinking about the risk that is relevant to your own individual situation. So it's not a proxy for decision making with this tool here. One of the new features that we wanted to profile, and it backs up quite nicely the slide that Tim had earlier, is that we've brought in this historical kind of component. I often find people sitting around having conversations about, you know, how this PSA year compared to previous ones. So the model now has a component where you can go in and have a look at the historical data in terms of infection events. And you'll see up there quite nicely in terms of the green and the orange line are the last 2 seasons. And particularly in that high risk period that we know is the spring of the sort of September, October into November, there is that kind of lower number of what Rob has described as a PSA risk total for the whole year in that month, versus the 2 years prior to that, which I sort of was trying to date stamp where I was in 2016-17, and I remember 2016-17 season as being quite bad, and that plays out with the risk events. Where are we tracking for this year? The solid blue line gives you an indication of the risk events to date, sort of sitting, roughly more towards the first 2 years of data that's presented here, so more in the severe end of things, but it is later in the season tracking down towards where we've been for the most recent 2 years. So you can go in and have a look in terms of past historical data to see how the season's tracking. We also know how much growers and orchard managers love their phones, so we have moved the KVH risk model to being available through your mobile platform. So if you're someone who'd rather have it right there at your fingertips, please go in and download that and have it available. But at the very least, I hope this has left you with the importance of considering your local weather and your orchard's individual risk scenario when it comes to making spray decisions.
Hands in the air.
Like just don't care.
Just a minute, Monty.
Yeah. Sonia, I'll take you up on your point, and actually Phil might like to contribute here as well. Just in regards to the lack of data or not having the data sets there to make comments in regards to inoculum amounts. Is there any way that we can use trap plants in regards to severity as well as incidence for trying to look at that? Is that a viable option?
I'll make a start and invite Phil to, you get the thinking time, I'll just blurt it out. So what we do, we measure both severity and incidence, but I might be taking a very scientific approach to answering your question. I think if you're wanting to have it as a tool in your own orchard as a grower or orchardist, the problem is I suspect it will get prohibitively costly to do it. The costs to actually raise those plants, deploy them and then grow them on and assess them, I think would prohibit it. Phil, did you want to comment?
Yeah, it's a good point, Monty, because what we don't have at the moment is a rapid, reliable molecular tool. And at the onset of the GoldFutures project, it was always envisaged that we would perhaps be able to bring that tool into those orchards, but the trap plants in the end turned out to be the best tool, but they are still an experimental tool. The beauty of the trap plants is that we can still use trap plants if there's research to look at sort of the effect of A or the effect of B on PSA populations in a block. So we can still use trap plants, but for individual growers, I don't think it's practical.
I'm sorry, I'm not talking about necessarily the individual growers. I'm just trying to think of a way that we can use, that we can try and understand. You're saying basically the inoculum's there all the time and it's just a weather event that triggers it or not. And then I'm saying, well, how can we measure the loading of the inoculum, and is there any way we can do that with the trap plants? And that's not necessarily for individual growers, it's just trying to get an idea of what the inoculum loading might be for a region or whatever.
Sure, my response to that would be that trap plants don't have the level of accuracy that you'd need to try and make that differentiation, and as I think Phil sort of referred to, you'd want more of a molecular quantifiable type tool, and we're just not there yet. We did in the very early stages do a lot of trying to actually track PSA on plates, and people had spore counters and that sort of thing out there, but just it's so challenging with the bacteria.
Just to reply, Monty, if Phil had 3 hours to present the GoldFutures project,
he still wouldn't finish it.
you would notice that the trap plants you use on those blocks followed the PSA risk model to a point that was quite specific. So if the risk model showed high risk, the incidence was very high as well in the trap plants. For me, that information was quite important because I've been reluctant to use the risk model just because it's quite high in Waikato, as you can see constantly. Take this opportunity to make a comment on here. The gentleman asked about the why and how was done on the GoldFutures project, what worked. I would say, we had 5-6 sites part of the project, and then tomorrow there'll be some workshop. I'm more than happy to discuss and explain what we did that actually made some real changes for us. So tomorrow, the workshop. Sounds good?
Very well done. You snuck in. It was a question you tried to ask the last time. Said you couldn't, and you found your way. Good man. Very resourceful. Barry, last question on this one before we go to the next.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Sonia. The work that Kabir presented earlier today and the timing of infection of those young flowers and how important it is to protect those young flowers early. How do we bring that together with the risk model? So as a grower, I know it's not only a high risk tomorrow, it's going to be a critical risk if I don't get a spray on. We seem to be not picking up some of these latest science developments and building it into the risk model.
Sounds like you're trying to overlay phenology.
Yes.
With environmental conditions.
Correct.
And to my kind of earlier presentation about where the steering group sees the priority for work going forward, it is very much around that knowledge extension, translation. And so a nifty little tool that could take that bit from Kabir's work and this bit from Rob's work and put it all together and put it on your phone, wouldn't that be great? So absolutely enjoy the provocation and take it as endorsement for where we want to move with things.
Yeah, good work, Barry, because one of the things you could do then for your orchard is you could put your bud break date in there, your varieties, your blocks, and it then becomes more personalised for you. I agree. Good provocation. Oh, here we go. Just a minute. You've got to get the microphone.
Barry, I'm provoking and putting out there. We need a Green Future project ASAP. The GoldFutures has done amazing work for us, so I think Green Future project, it's on the way.
Man, he's taking liberties, this fella. He's already spending innovations money before we get started. Good on you, Miguel. We're going to keep moving, team. One more presentation before we get Linda to do a wrap up. Yes, I hadn't forgotten you, don't worry. Mel Walker is going to tell us a little bit about the future of bactericides in the crop protection standard. Mel.
I'm not Glenn Bradbury, obviously. He apologises that you're stuck with me. So the future of bactericides and all of the fun things that go along with that. So obviously what the current state is, how our season has gone, and the stuff that we've noticed this particular season versus some of our others. That then kind of bounces off from the regulatory reports that we see coming through kind of every year. CCPU, which is slightly to the left of these things, but we've always previously grouped them together, so I'll comment on that as well. And recommendations for our 2020 season. This was kind of pulled together a bit ad hoc by me because initially there was only one slide that I was given, so I do like to see graphs. I find them relatively interesting and they're quite good for us to understand by looking at them how we're going, and especially from the seasons that we've previously had. So looking at this, we can see that there is a very slight decrease in Cassamin last year and a slight increase in Strepto use. I think that can be attributed to the fact that flowering probably caught a few of our growers off guard. Interestingly, when you look at the numbers and you look at the growers that use Strepto consistently versus those that might use Cassamin, we actually did have quite a shift from new growers using a key Strepto that didn't use it last year. And the other way around. So that for me actually I think is quite promising, knowing that growers aren't necessarily always using these products consistently year on year, that we do have some growers that may be reaching to use that tool because of the timing or because of the issues that have presented to them. From a seasonal issue, obviously we have audits that are done randomly on growers that wanting to apply a bactericide. Now, concerningly, the rates of failures on those has gone up, so about 5% increase to what we've historically had on those. And that is largely stuff like sward management not being done. So these are two audits. One has done a great job at managing their sward, and I don't know what the other one was doing. And it is quite frustrating when I see these pictures. So I get a report back from the audits that are done, and what an auditor might fail, I might necessarily not non-compliance against that. I will go through those and be pragmatic as possible. Often the auditor can't get out there the day after the product has been applied, and if it's been 3 days, you can kind of see that, look, has the grower or the MSO done what they, to the best of their ability, what they can, and I think the one on the left is just absolute rubbish, and it's really frustrating when I see images like that, and when we also understand what's happening with high cane and these other community concerns that we have. This is something that is relatively basic, that is expected when these products are used. So for that not to happen, that's quite frustrating. I think it's also to suggest that just because we have an increase in hectares, so as an industry we may be increasing in size, it doesn't mean that we should assume that the use of bactericides, or especially the use of key strepto, is increasing along with it. From a regulatory reports perspective, this is really important to us because these are reports that are done by MPI, and they're on a whole, the antibiotic use, and they break them down into vet med and agriculture, and then they break them down further into horticulture and the individual types of antibiotics that are used, and they specify them in the report. They explicitly state stuff like key strepto, and they also allow us to comment back on that. So knowing that we are an industry that uses these products, they come to us and they let us know what their data shows, and we have the ability to feed back onto that. But it's really important that we firstly do feed back into that, but it's also really important as an industry that we understand that this information is public. So it's very easy for a member of the public to gain access to these reports and actually see what industries are using these particular products, because this is all based around antimicrobial concerns and what's happening globally and how we can change as an industry. And it shows, I guess, the increase especially, and as a community member, but as an industry, we should be concerned about that. It's not just us, that there are other industries that are using them, but we are grouped together in this, and it's important that we understand that this is public, and if we don't do something about the use of these products, we will lose markets. It's simple to say, because you read through this, and especially as a community member, it's quite scary when you read the statistics. CPPU. So for a long time, we'd kind of grouped these, our bactericides and our CPPU together. Now, because CPPU is quite annoying to say, I'm just going to say ambitious. We had initially done that because there was a bit of a market flare or a bit of a trend around the concerns on PGRs on fruit. Naturally, we don't apply it to fruit. It's pre-flowering. But understanding why growers use the product, we've kind of lacked a bit of knowledge there. So we changed the wording to our survey last year to better understand, yes, bactericides, but also the use of ambitious and why these growers are using it. So this particular graph here is in response to the question that, do you use ambitious for PSA? Yes. And why do you use it? So overwhelmingly, those that are using it, they really feel that it's working for them. We have about just under 30% of growers that use ambitious. And then if we could consider key strepto use, it's around 6%, and Casamine use is around 40%. So I think this is quite interesting, and from a sustainability perspective and from a products perspective, we're removing the two. So bactericides treated differently, and then key strepto treated differently. So with the goal to drive out key strepto use by about 2022, and getting a better understanding of why those growers that are consistently using key strepto is really important. So we have a report on the high users of that product, and we will be going out to those users this year and actively talking to them and understanding why they feel that that's the product they need to be using. Are they just being suggested to use it by whoever, their manager, their pack house, their retailer? And getting that knowledge hopefully will make us a bit more confident in tightening those restrictions with that aim to drive out key strepto in that kind of 2022 season. Do I have to stay up here?
I'm just getting my next set of writing instructions. Sorry. Questions of Mel.
we've got one from Linda down the back. Reminder to those online, if you've got a question, bombard Sonia. Oh, don't ask it, she says. Stand in front of the mic.
That picture you showed, Mel, of the 2 sites that have been audited for a bactericide was pretty shocking, I thought. And I'm just interested to know how hard a line Zespri will take on what appears to be flagrant abuse rather than uninformed use.
And sometimes what I want to happen, other people don't think that that's okay. So look, to be honest, that's probably the better of some of the failures. The number of flowers we had in the canopy this year, failure on that was just, I say off the chart. I mean, it's still small percentages, but it's unacceptable. And I think that's it's a key point to support our removal, that some of the consistent users don't care anymore. A lot of the feedback that we get goes, oh, but apples can use it in flowering. Okay, we can't. Yeah, so it's quite a difficult pushback often when those people get non-compliances. It is interesting to hear what the reasoning is behind some of them, or the excuses as to why this is clearly unacceptable. Initially, we didn't include the photos on the failure, and we waited for them to push back and tell us that we were wrong. I've not bothered with that. I'll just include the photos the first time around. So trying to understand the best way to approach those failures, and in large, I feel strongly about the consistent failures. So we target every orchard that has failed the year before, and if they fail again, why have they failed and what is the reason behind that? So it's getting support from others around us to come down harder on those that aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And I think we will have better support on that this season, considering the issues we're having with high cane. It's a perfect example for our industry why we need to be clear that this behaviour is not okay.
So where do you want the support from?
Hugh has just asked, where do you want the support from?
Often it is at Zespri. So there are a lot of legalities around putting tighter restrictions on things, and sometimes that can take longer than you would want it to take.
Sounds like the Prime Minister of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Question for Mel from the phone. Yep, we've got a couple of questions in the room. So Barry behind you. But while Barry's getting the microphone, is the failure rate for audits higher for those applying Casamin? Wondering if maybe there is complacency with it being a little less controversial than Strepto.
There doesn't seem to be a pattern between it doesn't seem to be obviously one or the other. It's a little bit of both, I think. Because we had more failures of flowers in the canopy, those were all Strepto.
Thanks, Mel. It took Fonterra many, many years to finally figure out that they should be hard on farmers that abuse animals. Finally, they have got in place systems where animal welfare abuse, Fonterra can take action. And I think as an industry, those players that are obviously risking the rest of the industry's access to products need to be treated appropriately, which is harder than what they are.
Yeah.
So, but my question, taking out key strepto from the program, that leaves Kasigamycin still in the program. Kasigamycin used pre-flowering had a longer withholding period. I think it was 4 weeks compared to 1 week key strepto or something along those lines.
Yeah, pre-flowering, 21 days pre-flowering.
Yeah. I never felt there was any magic, wonderful science in that. I thought that was just a precautionary stance. So in taking key strepto out, is that period going to be reviewed so that growers potentially could use up to 7 days pre-flowering, similar to what key strepto is?
Yeah, Strepto is not technically in the program. It's allowed to be used through a JA, but it's not technically listed. That Casamin extended period is just because of grower behaviour. So we do know that it is safer to use closer to flowering, but the concern becomes that people have flowers in their orchard and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So it's been extended to that point to try and pull up those in the industry that may not be paying as much attention as possible, or they are getting complacent, to prevent those possible residues from happening. We do know that it is possible to get residues from these products, and that's trying to avoid that, you know, to the best of that ability. And obviously with the consideration of Oreo Gold, we do hopefully have, that's something we can put in that period.
Sorry, Hugh, we've got one over here, and
Melanie,
you'll get one chance. It'll be the last question.
I think that the answer is just spray it early. We see in the data here, why would you just allow the people and encourage the people and circulate the information that need to be sprayed when there are 5 or 6 leaves? Put the customer in there, it's done, it's doing the work that needs to be done, and spray it early and keep it in the program.
Yeah, so Casamin isn't being removed from the program. It's more that we need to understand that it's very likely it'll be taken out of our hands in the future. But for now, so Casamin is staying in the program, but we need to understand that it is included in the antimicrobial report. It is stuff that becomes public, and to be honest, the average Joe doesn't know the difference between streptomycin and kasugamycin. We can say that they are quite different, but when someone reads a report like that, we are grouped in with that. And we need to understand that as an industry, it's really important that we have our community support. And I can guarantee you that the concerns around the use of antibiotics are going to far outweigh the issues we've had with Hycane.
Yeah, just while Hugh's getting the microphone, key things, make sure we use it responsibly, a little like Hycane, right? Don't go and be a dumbass and use it in a dumb way and get it taken away from us. There are many growers out there that want these tools, and in some seasons we need them more than others, but we've got to use them responsibly, otherwise we'll be left with no tools to use at all. Hugh.
Well, why don't we go back to the past? When Key Strepto first came out, we actually had to get a pass. You got your orchard inspected, you bloody failed, you failed. Now, I know it was a pain in the ass, but it was, you know, it made things happen. If we've got ASs doing what we're seeing, and we know they're doing, well, I would recommend going back to the past.
I don't think that's a terrible idea.
And I'm 100% with you and with Mel.
I didn't know it was a thing.
In particular, those that have failed in the past aren't able to use it until they've been pre-audited. I reckon we'll put a show of hands around this room, everyone would fire theirs up. They are the sorts of people that are getting us more likely to lose these things than protect them. So I think you guys might want to consider that. Yeah, but I know there's a couple of powers that be that are in the room, that are listening, that do sit on the board of one or two organisations that they can have their say. And I, for one, will take it back to KVH, and that's what we'll recommend back through Zespri. Good idea. Oh, that's enough. He didn't mean that, Paul. He didn't mean that. And he swore more times than I have today, and I was warned not to. Anyway, thank you, Hugh. Look, good provocation, I think, and thank you, Mel, for the presentation. Our final presentation before I wrap it up is going to be Linda Peacock. She's going to give us her summary and a sum up of today's presentations and have us something to take away on PSA good practice.
Where am I here? Okay, here we go. It's got to be quick. Okay, good practice. Today we've heard a lot of good science, and we've heard feedback around some really good practice which has yielded good results through things like the GoldFutures project. So now it's our job to take those home and make a really good difference in our own orchards. So every spring, growers are still seeing the impact of PSA. We pretty much walk out at Labour weekend and we go, how the hell did that happen again? We listen to the science, we put on our products. How does this happen again? So what do we know? I guess what we do know is, and Phil showed it really well today, that we do actually have quite a bit of inoculum lurking around in our canopies through the winter. It's always been our recommendation to put on those winter sprays, and those trap plants in the GoldFutures project really helped identify to growers that it's an important time. So if you sit there right now and think back, so in this winter that's just passed, how well protected have your vines been through that period? You might have been some of the lucky growers who got your gold pruned early. So you pruned it, you put on your post-harvest coppers, and then the question becomes, and have you gone back and put extra copper cover on since then? If you in the more unlucky camp and you're a Hayward grower and you're still looking down the driveway to see when your pruners are coming, same question. How well protected has your canopy been through the winter? And when we consider that a lot of growers make the decision to prune out their infected material through their winter prune, if you are a green grower, haven't done your winter pruning, and use that time to take out your infection, you've basically been sitting all winter with inoculum in your canopy and the perfect weather conditions for that build-up of inoculum. And the last thing to think about is, as we drive up and down our rows with our sprayers on, and even a well-calibrated sprayer with the nozzle set up well, in our mind we're imagining that we're getting this amazing coverage over every part of our vines. It's in fact not true. Spraying is such a black science, and you need to do those multiple cover rounds to make sure you've got good protection. We know the weather erodes that cover. When we do our high canes, we're probably getting a further erosion of that cover. So as you sit there now, how well prepared are you for bud break? And I know some of you are already in bud break. So by the time we get to spring, coming up to spring, we have got inoculum load in our canopy to varying degrees. How much? That's your question. So we've got inoculum challenging on the outside of our buds, and particularly if our program has had some gaps in it. And then when those buds break open, there's a potential that there's more PSA under those bud scales now released into your canopy. So our good practice is to make sure that we have a good coverage of winter copper in place as spring buds emerge. We also know that new tissue needs protection. Tissue, particularly 1 to 3 weeks old, is particularly susceptible to PSA. So that young flush of growth, if there's PSA inoculum there, it's going to get infected. And once you've got leaf spot in that canopy, you've now got another inoculum source that you've got to deal with for the balance of the season. Kabir this morning helped us understand also about when our flower buds get infected. So yes, they get infected as early as 1 to 2 weeks after bud break. So that's sobering as well. It means that if I haven't got on top of my program early, my flower buds are more at risk. And that goes for Gold 3 as well. So we kind of see infection in the sepals. Kabir spoke to us about 4 or 5 weeks past bud break, we'll start seeing that. But in fact, if you looked at those sepals when they still looked beautiful and pristine and clean, there's still actually, and there's PSA inoculum on that, although you're not visually seeing it. If you haven't got a program in that is then dealing with that inoculum, you're going to turn up with flower bud infection later on. And for those that are working with Gold 3 on Bounty, and certainly perhaps considering the questions that we've heard today and the feedback and conversation today, maybe one of the things that we can do is consider spraying our spray practice timed more to those Gold 3 on Bounty. They break bud earlier, which means they also poke their noses out earlier to get frost damage. So we just need to perhaps change our timing. So if you have, and that I saw that block myself, side by side, very similar very similar orchard conditions, but potentially the timing was more attuned to the Gold 3 on Bruno rather than the Gold 3 on Bounty. So that's great. There's an opportunity to make a change there. So early. Had this discussion with other technical people, considering how can we improve things for growers to stop that label weekend, look up and see there it is again. Even our Hayward blocks, we probably gear our sprays thinking about when are my female vines going to break. In fact, I should probably be thinking about when are my male vines going to break bud. Because we know, certainly when we do our high cane timing decisions, we do calculations for 4 days, decide the exact date, and then it rains. So, you know, plan to get your coverage on when you believe your first buds will start breaking. So that also means your Gold 3 on Bounty should be ahead of your Gold 3 on Bruno, so work to them. Your red breaks, obviously, well before your Gold 3. So you've got to be planning for that as well. And don't forget about your young plants, they need protection. So what about Red 19? And I'm not putting this slide up to scare anyone who's just invested in some license, but we do need to raise awareness. And yes, Red 19 does get leaf spot, it does get shoot dieback, it can get cane collapse, and it can certainly also get exudate. It's a great variety. It's going to add huge value to this industry, and we've got some learnings to do with it. Bud break will be earlier, and how early depends on your site. So if you've got Red 19, make sure you note down when that bud break occurs, and also your flowering date, because remember, you've got to make sure you've got all your products in place to protect through that flowering period as well. So you need to know when that's going to come, and your site will be different and individual. There's some amazing new developments going on as well. And Phil very well said that you have to make sure that you start your site clean and you keep it clean. You spend a lot of money getting to this place. You're spending a lot of money on your frost protection, you're spending a lot of money on your shelter. Make sure you also spend time monitoring, putting in a good practice program, and above all, good hygiene. So what's my strategy? To know what my strategy should be this year, I need to go and trot around my orchard and see what I found. And these are a couple of shots that a Gisborne grower sent to me, and this is what they found. Okay, so first of all, the young grafted one, that looks quite challenging at the start, except he said there was only one plant like that in 2 hectares. So that's a good thing. The other one also looks quite challenging, PSA running down that canker, and for that block, 15% of his plants were in that kind of condition. So that puts him in a high risk site, and he's already thinking, how do I deal with this? I cannot go out there and put on endless rounds of products. So what he's chosen to do is he will make sure he's got a strong program. He will be speaking with Mel about a bactericide. And on top of that, he's got a guy going around putting copper paste over that exudate every 3 or 4 days. And when he calculates the benefit of that, it's a no-brainer. So this year, KVH have changed our wall chart around a little bit. We've still got all the details around the spray products at the bottom of that. And we have at the top moved in the cultural practices, just to keep that front of mind for the growers. That is another significant way of managing your PSA and your risk. Also, that prompt on the left-hand side, build a plan to manage your orchard. If you're sitting in Nelson, you're in a different space to sitting in Whangarei, and a different space if you're in Kerikeri. A different space if you're high altitude versus down on the frosty hollows that have been already taking a hammering. So the message is your site, your decisions, your strategies. So get out and walk your orchard. So in terms of inoculum risk, if you start seeing oozing coming out of your pruned canopy, you know your exudate is on, your inoculum's on the rise. So where am I seeing that on my orchard, and how much of it am I seeing? If you're seeing rotten buds in your canopy, it means that you've got a systemic infection and you need to have a strong canopy going through the year. A little bit later on, you start seeing leaf spot. You know that you now need to make sure you've got a really strong program going forward, because you've now got some inoculum there, which can flow over into flower bud infection and cause you further challenges. The Cut It Out project provided some good feedback and some strategies about how and when you should cut out. And if you are on a Hayward high-risk site, a reminder, you need to think about when is my flowering date and what time is 30 days before that. Put it in your diary, remind yourself that you need to be thinking about girdling then. Keeping PSA out is a priority, and on the left-hand side there, there's an indication that from the GoldFutures project, a higher degree of tool hygiene was being carried out in those orchards which at the start of the project were suffering less from PSA. So it was quite a quick fix. There was a huge change within 1 year for those guys on the unmanaged sites to say, hey, I'm not doing that. I can make that change. It's not a simple change, I know, but it's an important change. And if you have difficulty getting your pruners to do what you want them to do in terms of hygiene across all of your orchards, at least know where your most difficult spots are in your orchard. And for those, the times that are in those spots, make sure that your supervision is intense. We need to understand our toolbox. We've got a mature toolbox, which has currently got quite a good number of products in it. And those products have all got different modes of action. So you need to understand of that pick and mix, which ones should I be focusing on for my particular location. Copper is the backbone, but copper after the event is nowhere near as valuable as copper before the event. Make sure we've got our copper protection in place before trouble arrives. Bactericides for high-risk sites, already spoken a lot about that. Important to get that good stewardship so it does remain in the toolbox. Oreo Gold's back, which is fantastic. One thing I would say though, if you intend to put Oreo Gold in your program, you need to make sure you've also told farmlands or fruit fed or the suppliers that you intend to put Oreo Gold in your program so that you secure supply of it. So this will be a great product which will help fill this gap, that's this pre-flowering period. As Mel said, last year flowering came up on some growers a little quickly. They hadn't got their Cassamin on, so they put Key Strepto on because they didn't feel they had anything to fill that flowering gap. So Oreo Gold will be good there for guys with young developments and with a little bit of concern about their leaf quality but concerned that copper might be a bit tough on them. You can put Oreo Gold mixed in with your copper program, but you've got to understand the time periods there. So you apply a co-side. You can't apply, or don't apply Oreo Gold within 10 days of putting on a co-side. Don't apply Oreo Gold within 14 days of applying Nordox. If you apply Oreo, you can come in again later with your coppers again. So Actigard is a hugely valuable product. It's an elicitor, so a different mode of action, and if you apply it early, you get good defence against leaf spot, and leaf spot creates inoculum, and inoculum creates further disease. So Actigard early in your program, and again, an Actigard close to flowering can protect you through the flowering period and probably trails off into when you're doing your male pruning. So that's a really good product. CPPUs are preventative, so it has got value. Put it on at the right timing, help reduce the leaf spot, and then biologicals are useful on some sites. The risk model, we've talked about that a lot. For the future, we're looking at the prospect of being able to take weather data from your stations, putting it through the algorithm and feeding that back to you. That sort of level of sophistication is already happening for the apple industry now, and that will likely be with us within the next couple of years, so that's important. So what's spring going to do to us? Well, there'll be frosts and we'll get rain and it'll be windy. Just saying. Okay, so what's new? What's new is a little bit northeasterly. So what does that mean? Just make sure that if you need to think maybe a little bit more about your blocks that are a bit more exposed to the northeast. And final slide, 2020 has been tough. And it could get tougher, who would know? So leave nothing to chance, start early and stay on track. Good luck.
Well done. Great job, Linda. Well done. And thanks for all the effort that you put in. Hugh, I'm going to let you have one last say. No more swearing though, Chief. Has somebody got the microphone? I tell you what, why don't you ask the question and I'll repeat it, but don't you swear because I'm not allowed to.
I noticed up there, our oil go bud break through. At the moment, I can't buy it, I can't use it. 31st, what is it, the 1st of October, not available. Who the hell?
Oh, crikey. So, Hugh. Yeah. Hugh. Okay. So, for those of you online, I'm trying to be Hugh and I'm going to tone it down, but he is somewhat upset that the new Oreo Gold product is not available before the 1st of October, and as it's had its dramas in the past, and this season it looks like there may not be as much product available as everybody who wants it. Linda suggested you got in early. He would like to know who's responsible for that. I'm not sure anybody's going to put their hand up and take that one. It's a new product. It's coming. Hugh, there's been some issues, ACVM related, although not their fault. They've just enforced their rules. Anybody else want to help? I'm probably going to dig myself a bigger hole. Phil, I'm not sure you want to take all the responsibility either, but here we go.
Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, look. The indications are that between 5 and 7 tonne that's going to come into the country in order to be able to produce this microorganism, where the factories had to get new equipment, because they can't basically produce enough of it. That's the issue. They've bought that equipment, they've installed it, but these are 150,000 litre fermenters, so they're 3 stories high. So they're doing everything that they can to get it here to New Zealand as quickly as they can. I'm not sure if there's no really one individual that's been responsible for that. It's just the way it is with a new product.
I understand that, but why is there a date from NPI that we can't not get that product before 1st of October, when we've got vines that are out and producing now?
I think that's been the investment by that company and the 1st of October was just the first delivery date. Bear in mind that that the world has changed and the ability to get stuff here has impacted them. I'm not going to stand here and try and defend them. It is frustrating for all growers. There is a reason why Oreo Gold's entered the program, and at this point in time, nothing's been taken out. There's a hope in the future that it could be a replacement for something we don't want, but we're not going to do that in a hurry. It's still early in its development, and it's early in its designed for growers to decide whether it's right for their program as well. So you're just going to have to bear with us, Hugh. I can hear the frustration. Next year will be better, I'm sure. Don't hold me to that. Look, guys, we've run out of time. Before you all leave, though, you were handed out a feedback form. It was sitting on your chair. Many of you have put it on the floor. Really important with these sorts of events that the team get some feedback on what worked and what didn't, what else you'd like to see. So if you can please fill that out, fold it and leave it on your chair, that will be just fine. No, I'm not going to give you the option to not fill it in. I want you to fill it in, please. For those of you online, you don't get to miss out. You'll be sent a feedback form and asked to fill it in and give your feedback to the team. So that's coming for you. I really want to thank all the presenters. Our Superman here, Kabir, who did 3 presentations. Rob Beresford, Sonia Whiteman for her 2. Phil, yours, fantastic. Thank you very much. Mel, I know she shot through, but useful information. And Linda, the passion, as always, the summing up, that was awesome. Really, really well done. Round of applause for all the speakers, please. A couple more thank yous, Kirsten and Victoria for the planning. I know it wasn't without a few anxious moments early on, but seems to have gone pretty well, I reckon, except for Hugh, he swore too much. But finally, thank you to the people in the room and online, and for those of you that sent questions in. It's not quite as straightforward from online. The people in the room, plenty of questions, plenty of interest, plenty of conversation at afternoon tea time. Thank you so much for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all again at something like this next year. Thank you.